All right, everyone. Welcome to the 91-Day Business Spotlight Live. I'm your host, Jonathan Mast, and I've got with me today Matthew McQuinn from Coldlytics. And we're going to chat a little bit. Matthew's going to bring us up to speed on his business and what they do, who they serve, and all that. I want to thank everybody for joining us in on this live. Just as a quick reminder, if you're new on this, we are doing this for 91 days. We're on day 8 today. We're going through for 91 days. We're going to be interviewing anywhere from 2 to 3 amazing businesses every day. Just our way to give back to the community. If you happen to run a business and you want to join in on the fun, just make a comment below. I'll get you a link. With that, Matthew, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Coldlytics.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the killer intro here. So I've been in sales and marketing for the last 5 to 7 years, in some capacity longer than that, but really focused in this space for about 5 years. And prior to starting Coldlytics, I was a director of operations in an outbound agency, and I was responsible for overseeing hundreds of client campaigns where all we did was deal origination for business brokers and M&A advisors. So very high stakes, very high rewards. And in that process, I was responsible for providing a team of account executives with reliable data sources for them to run their campaigns on for these clients. And I have made every mistake with getting bad lists that you can make. I always tell people, I've overseen about 3 million cold emails, and about 90% of those cold emails taught me about the 2% that made people money.
That's good though.
Exactly. So there's been a whole lot of painful experience in that process, but it really did lead to a place where I have a good understanding of outbound systems now. And, I'm still learning things every day. It's a space that you can always learn more and develop and hone your skills in. So I'm always happy to kind of share any knowledge that I can. And kind of dive into any one area that might be of interest to the people watching this, Jonathan. So I'll let you kind of direct, what might be most interesting.
Well, let's start by talking about Coldlytics. So you guys, in its most simplest terms, to correct me if I'm wrong, you're providing high quality lead lists to businesses. Is that oversimplifying it, or is that close?
I think that's a great simplification of it. Yeah. There's 3 typical ways that people get lists, that get data for outbound marketing. And that's either to scrape a list yourself, to subscribe to a database, or to pay a researcher. And the problem with scraping lists yourselves is there's extensive work required to actually enrich that data, to qualify it, to scrub it, etc. It's just very, very burdensome, time consuming, and you often miss opportunities that you don't know how to access because you're not an expert in scraping. You're just doing it for means to an end for most people. So scraping is a good way to get started if you've got no cash in the business and you have time. There's no harm in trying a scraper and figuring it out yourself the old-fashioned way, but I don't recommend it to most people that are getting started because it's usually a poor use of people's resources.
Yes.
The second is databases, and I love and hate databases because, well, they give access generally to very cheap data. It's just that. It means every man and his dog has bought that same list of XYZ company, and all your competitors have been pitching them for the weeks and months before you ever bought that list too. So it's really hard to get an edge on a list of contacts that, for lack of a better term, have been burned by your competitors before you even had a chance at talking to these guys. So databases come with their own challenges. And then you get into the researcher side of things. You go to Fiverr, you talk to guys in India who are experts in scraping, etc. And the problem is, I'm very good at collecting lots of information, but the information you get is generally not very useful. Whether they're not providing any contact information, or the contact you get is really far off, or not a decision maker, or they don't understand your industry in the first place, and you ask for plumbers and they're providing electricians, and it's like, yeah, they're both in trades, but not the same thing, right? Especially when you're niche specific. So those are the 3 main sources that I've worked with, and the 3 big problems I had with each one. And when I met my co-founder, he came to me and he said, here's the idea that I'm working on. We actually met through a Reddit thread looking for other co-founders. And he said, I think the best way to get data is to have somebody who understands, Western business, actually identify the right companies that are niche specific, that fit the criteria in the first place. And if you can scrape that well and identify those companies in a systematic way at scale, you're down the right path, but you're still missing the actual contact information. And so he said, what happens from there is I then have a team of really qualified researchers that we've spent a lot of time looking for, and we're still in the beginning stages. We only had like 1 or 2 people that we trusted to find these contacts. But he said, what we do is we give it to the team of human researchers, and they go out and they scour the web for this information and they enrich it. So they find who the decision maker is, their first and last name, their job title, etc., and their email. And they're putting that in a spreadsheet using their intelligence and their processes that bring data to the table with companies that aren't necessarily in databases because they're freshly researched, and with
Mhm.
leads that aren't necessarily in databases because they're pulled from all over the web. So you're really empowering yourself with the best foot forward by using the data that Coldlytics provides through that process. And I haven't found a better way to provide data to anybody, or if I had, I'd be selling that. So
I
again,
love it.
something that I've spent significant amount of time, resources, money on doing it the wrong way in many cases. And I've seen the direct benefits between going from embarrassing yourself, sending a client a list of what should be manufacturers. And I gave one client an NFL team owner, and he came and just lit me up over a Zoom call. And I never forgot that day. I said, okay, I need to spend more time qualifying my lists before I give them to my clients. And that was really an experience that stayed with me and helped shape the importance of realizing that not just to me, but to the client I'm working with and to ultimately the people we reach out to, we owe it to them to have done a good job in making sure they're the person that should be hearing this message, because otherwise you're spamming people, and there are laws around
Mm,
that practice.
good
So
point.
it's so important to have a great source of data, to do it well, to start off on the right foot. Otherwise, you're trying to sell meat to a vegan by working with the wrong data, and it's just not going to happen.
I love that, and I think one of the things I really like about the way you're doing things at Coldlytics is it's not just a scraped list. It's not that cheap list that I can buy that everybody else has got. It's been researched, it's been validated, it's been curated,
Right.
and there's so much value to that because that means now my sales team is being able to be more productive, and they're not wasting their time either. And
Yeah.
the costs are certainly very much in line. You brought up something that I think a lot of our viewers may be curious about, Matthew, and that's what about the spam laws and what about the reaching out?
Mm,
You know, I know we can use your list from Coldlytics to do cold email, for cold calling, for what I call snail mail, old fashioned snail mail.
right.
But as it relates to that, can you give us any advice and best practices as it relates to, whether it be cold calling or cold email
Sure.
and the list that you've got? How does that work, and what does a business need to be aware of? Because I think there are dangers if they're just willy-nilly reaching out to anybody
Yeah.
based on without having good information. But I'd like your perspective.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's something we're all interested in. I think it's something that many of us haven't spent any time truly looking at before we got started. Um, so I'll preface this by saying, don't take this as advice, and definitely consult legal counsel to make sure you're doing things the right way. But
Touche.
that aside, from my experience, I tend to follow CAN spam's laws and regulations to govern what I do, regardless of where I'm emailing. Generally, if you're complying with CAN spam, then you're really on the right track to being compliant in most places. And there are exceptions to this. California has specific laws that are different than the rest of the country. The United Kingdom,
Surprise.
right, exactly, yeah. United Kingdom has a different set of laws. Germany has different laws. So there's different countries and areas that have very unique rules around these things. And it's important to know what you're playing with, because you're playing with fire if you're doing this the wrong way. And just to emphasize the significance of emailing the right people, the right thing, for every instance of a CAN spam violation, the last time I looked at this, it was about $45,000 for each instance. So if you sent an email campaign to 100 of the wrong people in the wrong industry, they treat that as spam, and you can multiply that $45,000 fine against every email you sent them and every follow-up sequence you sent them.
Oh my
So this
goodness.
becomes a liability that can shut down many businesses who have no idea, what these laws are. So the rules that I apply for myself, generally speaking, are this. First of all, CAN spam, much like Google, if you're in the SEO world, is about user experience, and it's about making sure people are getting things that they value for what they're doing in their world. So depending on some batches of articles you'll read, some people take the disposition that you need to have an opted in, yes, I'm interested in receiving mail from this person before you email them. Some people will stand on that hill and take that position. Most people don't, but there are some companies that interpret the law that way, and it's a bit of a gray zone. Most people interpret the law to say that it needs to be a relevant, targeted message to somebody who you could imply the consent that it would be relevant for them to receive this message from me. And so here's where a big line gets drawn: business to business versus business to consumer.
Good
Consumers
point.
very rarely have done anything that would imply a consent for a business to cold email their personal inbox, versus a business owner being approached by a marketing agency to say, hey, we helped somebody else just like you, and I have 2 or 3 tips I'd love to give you that might help your business grow too. If you're interested, we do offer implementation services. That is of value and relevant to that receiver, and you could infer that that person would want to receive that email. And if not, Can Spam requires that you give them a clear, simple opt-out option in that email. And if you don't state that, it's a violation. It doesn't have to technically be a button. It can be text instructions. And it needs to be honored within 10 days. So there's a bit of leniency on adhering to that. That 10-day window is kind of generous in my opinion. So if your automations are still running and it took a minute to get it corrected, it's not all for naught. They've given kind of that grace period to get it right. So emailing the right people, sending them something relevant, having a clear opt-out option. These are kind of the very fundamentals. And then there's more beyond that. They also talk about the subject lines in Can Spam. So you need to have a clear subject. You need to not be deceiving people with the emails that you're sending. So you can't tell them their commercial properties on fire and then talk about how it actually has something to do with their finances and it'd be a totally different story, right? That's going to be treated as spam. You need to make sure that what you're telling these people is genuine, true, and not misleading in nature. Then the other thing you have to have is a physical business address of some kind. I believe it can be a PO box. Don't quote me on that.
Sure.
But you need to have a physical address listed as well for the business. So everything about Can Spam, as you start to paint this picture, really goes back to, hey, are we ensuring that people are sending emails to people who want them potentially and are doing it in a way that proves they're a legitimate business that has the best intentions. They're sending a clear message. They're not deceiving anybody in that practice. They're giving them clear instructions on how to stop receiving emails from people. And they're doing things to be very transparent about who the business is, like providing a physical address in that email. If you're doing all those things, you're well on your way to having a very compliant cold email campaign. And that's how I send my cold emails, is by following most of those rules. There are, of course, dozens and dozens of pages in the Can Spam regulations that you could read and go into. But those are the key takeaways that I've applied to all of my cold emails. And if somebody's watching this and is like, Matt, you're missing something super obvious here, I can't believe you're not doing that, please reach out to me because I'd love to improve my own campaigns. But those are the things that I do as far as compliance and regulation goes. The other thing to be aware of is that if you're emailing people in California or in other places that have separate regulations, there's usually certain, at least in California, I believe there's a threshold. If you're doing more than like 20 or 30,000 outbound messages, it's something like that last time I looked, which was a few years ago now. That's when these laws start to apply to you. If you were emailing 1 or 2, from what I recall, and when I was looking at this, was there wasn't really any additional things that needed to take place. But the moment you cross certain thresholds in California, you then have obligations to track where all of this data was sourced, who sent what, when they sent it, etc. Even if it's an agency doing it for you, you as the client have an obligation to keep a record of all the messages the agency sent, etc. So it starts to get very hairy very quickly. But again, at a certain threshold, at least last time I was looking into this. So do a little bit of homework, and there's tons of blogs out there. Really, that's where I got the most of the information I actually took action on was, okay, who are these companies that have budgets for lawyers to analyze this stuff and to approve the blogs that they're publishing? Because they're obviously not going to say anything that's going to come back on them when they have legal structures in place in these public companies that are talking about this stuff. So take advantage of other people's money and resources by reading from places that have vetted that information before they put it out to cover their own rear. So that's my approach to compliance.
Well, amazing information there, Matt, and I really appreciate that. One of the things I want to encourage our listeners, if you're buying lead lists and that, just think of the difference from what Matthew shared with us as compared to the, instant message you get over Facebook from somebody in some country, who knows where, trying to sell you a list. My last one, I think I saw Matthew this morning, was 10,000 qualified, vetted people for 99 bucks. Yeah, not a chance. I mean, there's no way you're going to do that. And if you did, you sold it to every other person that resembles me on the universe in order to make money doing that.
Right.
So, if don't fall for the cheap lists, guys, it's a waste of your team's time, your time,
Yeah.
and it might get you in a whole bunch of trouble as well. Go to Coldlytics, find out. In fact, Matt, that's my next question. So, Matthew, if they want to understand what type of leads you've got, how you can help them, where do they go? How do they connect with you guys, Matthew?
Yeah, for sure. So go to coldlytics.com. It's spelled like analytics, but with cold at the beginning. So coldlytics.com. And then if you have questions pertaining to anything that we've talked about, or data related at all, or outbound marketing at all, I'm always happy to provide resources where I can. So the live chat on that website doesn't go to some sales team with a script. It goes to me and my co-founder. We still proudly manage that chat as founders at this time. So go ahead, reach out, ask your questions. We'll give you resources where we can. And certainly if you want to try our data out, we do have a $7 trial that gives you 25 leads over a 7-day period that you can try this out for. So very low cost to kind of get your feet wet and see if it works for you. And if it doesn't, no problem. I'd love to personally learn why so we can improve our own processes. But in a nutshell, that's kind of who we are and what we're about.
Well, Matthew, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I want to give a personal testimony here. I have personally bought and used lists from Coldlytics, and they are by far and away the best I've ever had. I am one of those salespeople that has always said, I hate buying lists because they're all worthless. And it didn't
Right.
care whether we'd spent $10 on a lead list or $25,000 on a lead list. They all seem to be garbage. And you've changed my opinion on that. So, Matthew, thank you. You guys have done a great job with that. You provide us super high quality information, and it's actionable and it's affordable on top of all that. So, thank you for that. If you are running a business and you're thinking about leads, do yourself a favor. Reach out to the team at Coldlytics and see what they can do for you. I can personally attest to the value. It really does make a difference. So, Matthew, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. We went a little over time, but that's fine on my end. I don't mind. I hope you don't mind.
It's been
Thank
great.
you if you're listening with us. Thank you so much. Take to heart on the replay all the things that Matthew shared with us, and don't hesitate again to reach out if you've got questions. Everybody, make it a great day. We'll see you on the next session. Bye bye.